Hello, everyone, and welcome to the History of Diving Museum Immerse Yourself program in July 2023. We'd like to welcome the attendees, all of those who are on Zoom. If you have any questions during the course of the presentation, go ahead and pop it into the chat. Julia will be moderating for us. Also, let us know where you're from and how many people are with you so we can kind of have an idea of who's participating tonight. We also are going to be recording it and posting it on the History of Diving Museum YouTube channel. I'd like to thank tonight's sponsor, David and Patty Gross. Patty is on the board. They're very active in the community, a fellow explorer, has done a lot of coral restoration with Adele and actually done a lot of your projects and missions in the Keys together. Right now, this whole Immerse Yourself presentation complements our Aquanauts to Astronauts featured exhibit, which will be opened at the museum through December 31st. So don't drive by, dive in. Next time you're coming down to the Keys. Next month, our Immerse Yourself program will be Scott Cassell. He'll be talking to us. He's a world-renowned explorer. He does documentaries. He's done a lot of research. He's worked on submersibles. He's going to kind of talk us through submersible operations and some of the expeditions that he's been on in Lake Tahoe and other places. So that'll be fascinating. But tonight we want to welcome Adele. I met her a couple of years ago. She's just a phenomenal resource for the diving and space community, as well as the environmental community. She is the Extravehicular Activity Project Manager. That's quite a mouthful for a title. Working for Oceaneering and has worked with training astronauts in mission control, and tonight talk to us about all of those, as well as packing for a spacewalk. Kind of not like packing for a hike in Colorado, I am sure. So thank you for giving us your time tonight. I'm going to ask everybody to be sure to mute and to go ahead and, you can turn off your video. Adele's going to have a presentation. And again, go ahead and write those questions in the chat box and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so nice to talk to the community. As mentioned, I did get a chance to talk to you guys briefly a couple years ago on the Women's Dive Day that you had, and it's such a nice community you have at the museum. So it's a pleasure to be back. Thanks for having me. And my husband and I are members, so we're very supportive of the museum. And Oceaneering actually has a EVA safety tether as part of the exhibit. So if you do go through, you'll see a piece that we were able to put on loan, which is really exciting. I will say when I start here, the opinions and voice I'm sharing, while from experience, is not directly from Oceaneering or from Collins or any of or NASA. Just speaking on behalf of my own 2 cents and kind of giving you hopefully a glimpse into the future of some of the challenges you might have heard similarly before, but some of the new things we're learning as well, because we're always learning new things. So the picture you're seeing here, I really love this photo. This is a high resolution photo that when I was training astronauts, we didn't have anything like this. So it's really great to have these images. It makes you feel like you're right there. And this is the present for us. This photo was taken during a spacewalk on the International Space Station. And this is where we're starting from. Lots of really good lessons learned, lots of success with our spacewalks. And we're looking forward to building to the future. And what I want to talk to you about is really, oh, hang on. Okay, that next step. So this is what Earth looks like from Mars. Some of you might have seen this photo before. I show it a lot when I talk to kids and try to really help them understand, express to them what it's going to be like when we go this far. And to the community I'm speaking with here, the equivalent might be doing a really remote dive trip in which you might even have to take extra tanks because you're not going to be near a compressor for a while, or extra spare gear because you've invested so much money and time to get to this location to do the diving that, you really want to make sure you get out there on those dives. And so similarly, these are trades that we're having to make and talking about with NASA even now. So I just got back a couple of weeks ago from a moon to Mars technology extensibility discussion. It was an architecture study in which we were talking about things we're designing right now for the moon and how much of that could be directly related to Mars and or how much would need to be modified for Mars. So we're already seriously talking about Mars in my everyday conversations with my team. I'm encouraging my team to go ahead and bring in and stretch to Mars, specifically in terms of kind of that time that it's going to take for things to get there and delayed communications, because that is really the future. So it really does push you. And like I said, if you've been on a remote dive vacation or an exploration trip, you've been there and you've had to think through some of these things. And just to do a little bit of a brief background on me, I am a physicist. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in physics. I'm published as a lead author, and thought I was going to be a research physicist growing up. I thought I would be at an academic institute, and realized that actually I was more of an applied physicist. And I get a question a lot of times of physics versus engineering. And for me, it was all the different crossovers that physics allowed me to do. So you can imagine a spacesuit has everything from biomedical to, DCS and getting the bends that we have to deal with, to pressures, flows, sensors, interfaces, human machine teaming. All of this comes together in a vehicle this small. And so having that physics degree really helped give me a solid foundation. And I actually went to school in Florida. So I am a Floridian. Went undergrad in Florida Institute of Technology. I actually grew up in the Cape Coral, Fort Myers area. And then, as Lisa has mentioned, I actually returned several times to the Florida Keys to help with coral restoration outplaning as a volunteer scuba diver. And so, yeah, so it's kind of scuba diving and space is kind of this is full rounded, as you've heard from many speakers, and it kind of all seems to come together. In my 20s, I was very lucky to train astronauts as an EVA astronaut instructor, and then flight controller. So I would sit in mission control during the spacewalks. And I got to work shuttle and space station spacewalks, including the last Hubble flight, which was quite amazing to see, really. And so now it's exciting to be able to talk to future vehicles. So we're talking about doing spacewalks that were on the lunar surface. We're talking about things like pressurized lunar rovers, and then also unpressurized rovers, which I'll show you a kind of a picture of where we're going. And then also talking about Gateway, we're talking about Orion, not spacewalks from Orion, but Orion eventually docking to Gateway, and then Orion going to Mars, and kind of how is this all going to work? How are we going to bring this whole big picture together? And I'll just show you, just for hobbies, I fly seaplanes. It's my favorite type of plane to fly, and also do coral restoration diving. So, kind of, I think having that full rounded hobbies and work kind of allows you to work hard, play hard, but also be integrated and kind of give you new ideas sometimes, especially being very hands-on with equipment. I found that it personally, being a diver and a pilot, has really helped me not only in being in instruction, but also in working with the design teams and thinking forward about what can we do better on the suit, and what are the best practices we want to keep, and not make something so overly complicated or forget some of the things that did work well. So for the future for Artemis, this to me, I love this picture. I show it a lot. There's so many things about it that I'd love to just point out to you, a couple right now. One of which is you see at least 4 astronauts out on a spacewalk. And right now we do spacewalks with 2 astronauts at a time. Once we've done 3, but in general, it's always 2. It's the buddy system, just like scuba diving. And this idea of having multiple suits outside is just incredible to me. Like, I just think, how are we going to keep track of everyone? And, we're going to get so much done outside. And it brings up a lot of conversation about do you have to stick with this buddy system? Do you get to see your buddy's data, or is it always going to have to be some kind of communication that has to occur? Do you need help from either a ground from MCC in Houston, or do you need someone monitoring inside if you have multiple people that are switching out, or pairs, and kind of changing this whole dynamic? And it's funny because with Coral Restoration Foundation, we actually do a rotational buddy system. And so coming in and saying, hey guys, divers have figured this out for a while, so we can get there too. But it really is exciting to see multiple spacesuits outside and be talking about this. You also see in this picture this concept of a pressurized rover in the middle here, and then the unpressurized kind of on the bottom right corner. That provides challenges in each in its own for spacesuits, as far as getting in and out of hatches, being able to recharge the suits. Also, if you're on an unpressurized vehicle, how far away can you go? Can you take the equivalent of a pony bottle with you in case there is an emergency, so that you have some additional oxygen? Things that we really didn't talk about on ISS, but as ISS grew, that was a lesson learned for us, where the emergency consumables that we had planned for the shuttle, which were fine, we realized we were going pretty far when we get all the way down to the end of the trusses for the space station. And trying to get back in 30 minutes for an emergency would be very tight, potentially, just really down to that line if you had a large hole in the suit or a micrometeor hit. So really trying to, again, take those lessons learned, think out of the box, think about what we can do, apply other domains, practices that we haven't applied necessarily in space before, but could we do it in the future? And that would allow for more extensibility and exploration than we've ever done. So those are kind of a couple of things. And then, of course, if you follow the news, we're going to the South Pole. So very dark environments, thermally cold. And, another thing a lot of people don't realize, but they did talk about in Apollo, is your vision of shadows and your perception changes because there's not an atmosphere and because of the way light plays. So you have to be really careful when you're walking or you're driving that you don't get yourself in a situation that's unsafe because your eyes are kind of deceiving you a little bit. And that can happen flying and diving too, but especially because there's no atmosphere here on the moon. So we're using sensors, we're using all kinds of other indicators to assist the crew members, the astronauts, to make sure that they don't get in an unsafe situation, especially when it's extremely dark. We're talking about things like reflective materials on the suit. So if an astronaut did fall and they fell with their lights down, could you still try to find them, specifically if there's quite a bit of regolith. So there's so many new discussions we're having, and it's really exciting to talk through all of these and try again to bring those best practices throughout. One of the common questions we get, and I think this is, if you're divers, you probably get the same thing, is some people will say, why go on a dive? Why are you diving? It seems scary, it seems dangerous. We actually get that question a lot, and it is something to balance. So why go on a spacewalk? Can things be done robotically? Can you kind of avoid this entirely? What is the value? Spacesuits are very expensive, all these kinds of things. And it is, a spacewalk is dangerous, just like diving. It is physically and cognitively demanding. So we do need individuals that we make sure we put them in a really good physical and mental state before they go out the door. So go out to the vacuum of space. And we do make sure we do a lot of really good training. So we train in the neutral buoyancy laboratory at JSC, at Johnson Space Flight Center in Houston, Texas. And we really try to set them up for success as much as we can. But at the end of the day, while we have been able to increase what we can do from a robotic standpoint on the space station, there's still just things that humans just do well. And I think you hear this from engineering and collection of science. It just makes a difference. And so I don't think spacewalks will ever go away. I think it is part of exploration. I think it's an exciting part of exploration. I do think it's worth the risk. And I do think that one thing we're going to see in the future is actually different types of spacesuits or variations on spacesuits for really smart purposes. So right now, diving wise, we have wetsuits and dry suits and, 1 atmosphere suits. And I think you're going to start to see certain suits longer term that are designed for some of that more physical labor, or maybe more scientific, or maybe for climbing, or as we expand. And one of the things I can't do as much today as I'd like, we're going to try to show a video at the end, is talk a lot about the work I'm doing right now. It is proprietary, and we are a little bit in a healthy competition with Axiom, because we're both kind of NASA's done these commercial contracts in which they encourage this kind of healthy competition. And I've gotten questions on, well, why 2 spacesuits, right? Why should we fund 2 spacesuits? We should only find 1. But for me, I'm thinking, what if you ever just funded 1 airplane or 1 boat, or 1 type of diving suit? That would be unfortunate. So it's exciting to see us have the ability and the need in both commercial and government to have more than 1 type of spacesuit, and then to start to talk about these variations on spacesuits. Just to give a little bit of a picture for those that don't follow human spaceflight, Orion is the vehicle that's going to take us all the way to Mars. And to the moon, but Orion won't actually take us down to the surface of the moon. So we will dock to a lander, and the astronauts will transfer. Right now we're looking at 4 astronauts that would fly on Orion and would transfer over to a lander, or figure out how they're going to get to the surface of Mars. SLS is the vehicle that's going to take them. It is the largest vehicle to date, and if you followed, you guys probably did because you're in Florida, the news of Artemis 1. So we were successful as a community for human spaceflight, and that NASA was able to launch SLS. Orion was safe, passed all the tests, and now we're moving forward toward the next mission, which would be the crew. So we'd send 4 astronauts on Artemis 2. They would not land on the moon, but they would orbit around, and Artemis 3 will be the next time we land on the moon. So we're there. These things are real. They're not just being funded, but they are being real. They are launching, and we're getting closer. And so what does this mean for spacesuits then? Well, if we're going to walk and talk on the moon, then we need a spacesuit. And during Apollo, you probably noticed that astronauts were kind of jumping around like buddies on the surface, and joking around, having a good time. But some of that was due to the design limitations of the spacesuit. So they were not able to kneel down, move, and some of that was due to the lower torso assembly, the LTA. And we fixed a lot of those issues. So as a team, we've made a lot of discoveries on, you will see them now kneel. You're going to see them be able to get up on their own. During the time during Apollo, some of them would fall over. They could try to kind of push up and bounce back up. And then other times they needed their A partner to come over and actually help them get up. So there's some really cool improvements. I hope we'll get to that video, because there's really just a lot of increased mobility. You can also imagine there's going to be a much, much better computer system that we're going to have. And so just great improvements. We haven't had a new suit go to space in 40 years. So this space suit that we have right here for the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station, it was a workhorse. It was amazing. It continues to be amazing, and we're so thankful to have this spacesuit. But it's time to have the next one, and we're excited to be part of designing that. And just to kind of, so these pictures here, when I look at these pictures, right, I see people kneeling down. I see people not only kneeling down, but leaning over and working productively. And that mobility is coming. It's exciting. The kids I'll talk to, they'll say, well, what about the Martian? Like, look at that spacesuit. It's, why aren't we there? And it's been 40 years. It's been so long. And, sure, there are things about the Martian that we want to work towards. So he's wearing climbing gear on him. And that is something we know that's coming. So being able to integrate climbing gear, the ability to have a suit that is very form-fitting like that is technology that we've had different universities working toward. We're not there yet. The thickness in the spacesuit comes from protections of multiple layers. And actually, I've had the pleasure of actually doing an MBO run in the spacesuit, so doing a training run in our EMU, and then being able to get into very briefly our new developmental suit, not in the pool, but just on a test stand. And the suit fits you actually really tightly, to a point to where you get hot spots and you can get bruises. Your body's never going to win over metal. And so, when you're in the suit, it feels quite tight, but you need those layers right now to protect you for multiple different reasons, including keeping the pressure. So we're getting better, we're getting closer. We're not quite there yet, but there is a lot of technology that's coming, which we're very, very excited about. So, and one thing to mention is, I don't have to talk too much to this community about taking everything with you. I'll get to it a little bit later, but the lunar regolith, in particular on the moon and on Mars, but specifically on the moon that we're getting ready to deal with, is very sharp. It's a silica based, and so it's not only not really great for your lungs to be breathing it in, but it's also going to be very, very sharp to any of our displays, our electronics. So, I kind of show these micro scratches that I have on my aviator sunglasses. We're very aware that even just wiping things off or brushing things, cleaning things, we have to rethink some of this, specifically because we're not just going for a couple of days. We plan to go and stay there. And so let me talk a little bit more about, I'm actually going to skip this one real quick. So what does this mean for spacesuits and sustainability? So let's do some of the math here. Artemis, and I'm not going to get into chemistry or equations, so don't be alarmed, but I do want to talk through a little bit of what the packing means. And you can think again about kind of packing for your latest kind of longer scuba diving trip. So for Artemis 3, it's a 6 to 7 day surface mission, which is 4 scheduled spacewalks, including 1 contingency. And that would be, for Artemis 3, you're going to have 2 crew members that are going to go down to the surface, is what we're talking about right now. And so that's they'd do 2 spacewalks, they'd have a day off, and then do another 2 spacewalks, with then holding for a contingency spacewalk as needed. That's a very tight schedule when you think about landing, getting ready, unpacking everything, doing your final checks, taking that day, and then getting back and then coming back up. And you can imagine each spacewalk probably isn't going to go perfectly. So there's going to be some replanning that's going to occur, some adjustments. And so the astronauts will need to wake up and kind of be ready with that new plan, and be ready to go to kind of adjust as well. So very tight mission. Things that they're going to need to take with them, all their O2. So our spacesuits go down in pressure, and when you come down in pressure, as you guys are probably aware, you have to increase the O2 to compensate, and the spacesuits are low enough in pressure. Again, I'm not going to give too many numbers, but they're low enough that you're actually at 100% O2 environment. So the spacesuit is the last space vehicle that we have right now that is at the 100% O2 environment. After Apollo 1, we got away from that because of the fire. So we're very aware of being in a spacesuit, getting ready to get out the door means that we are, we have to be aware of what additional oxygen we're leaking into the overall cabin, both coming inside and outside, because we do raise that O2 of that overall environment. And then, being able to have those pure O2 tanks that we can recharge each time to go outside. The other thing is water. So our suits do use water for cooling and for circulation to keep a good body temperature. And so we have to take that water. That water is actually depleted while we're outside doing the spacewalk, and water's heavy. And that means that that's a separate water in the suit that comes from the drinking water. And so, of course, we have to account for all of that. Power as well. So the suits are charged and then they're on battery power while they're outside. So we always have to make sure we have enough time overnight to charge the suits. It does take a while to charge those batteries, including anything that's going to be a higher demand, like the helmet lights, the cameras, glove heaters, and we're even talking about the potential of heating your feet, because walking around in that cold regolith is actually going to be pretty cold, pretty big temperature differentiation. So and then on top of that, if you're packing, there's all these single-use items that we have. So they do wear a diaper. We still wear diapers every time we go out EVA. And that's usually a one-time use item. We have drink bags that we use. So we fill that full of water. They do have water. And now for the moon, there is a requirement, including a little bit for ISS, for the next suit to have nutrition. And so we're looking at different trades on how are we going to get that nutrition easily providable to the crew member while they're in their suit, while they can't really, open a wrapper or kind of do things because their hands are outside working. So interesting challenges that we haven't had in the same way before. We did have originally a while ago, they had kind of a fruit bar that they tried to eat, but it was very sticky and didn't work out well. So luckily we have a lot of different exercise nutritional options that are out there. So we are looking to try to get a COTS item. But I think that in general, it's just it's a good thing moving toward the future. And it will be interesting challenges to see how we integrate that. And then there's comfort items. So inside the suit, there are kind of like moleskin patches, if you're familiar, that helps with some of those hot spots. There's also kind of one-time use padding we can put in. And so, every time we do an EVA, these items not only are used, but you have to imagine then they have to be trashed in some way, whether they're kept in the vehicle or they're compressed and put outside somewhere as temporary storage until it can be removed somewhere else. And so now you get into a whole trash situation, which is kind of interesting. And then on top of that, we have the depress and repress atmosphere that we have to account for and pack for in order to just go out the door, go out and do the spacewalk. So whether that's a smaller airlock that's within a larger vehicle, or you're depressing or repressing the whole vehicle if it's a smaller overall vehicle, all of that gets accounted for when going out EVA. And finally, the food and nutrition. So, even though they're in these longer spacewalks, we do need them still to eat the same amount of calories for that 24-hour period. And so they're kind of eating in off times, either big breakfasts or, big dinners or a combination of both. And so that's additional activity that's still happening even during the spacewalk days. Okay, so just kind of to be on this slide, you can imagine just even those 4 spacewalks with the one contingency is quite a bit that you're packing for. And we get into some trades here also about backup equipment. So, normally a crew member has some additional backup equipment that they are able to take on the space station. We may not be able to take all of that for the moon. We do still want them to be able to take backup gloves. That is a requirement that NASA is talking about. In case something does happen to their gloves, not necessarily cut, but sometimes wear and tear can occur where you break down some of those layers, and now you do want to go to those backups to avoid having a cut glove. And so but this continual trade of how much backup things can we take, and looking toward the longer missions, these Artemis surface day stays, now we're talking about 30 days on the surface, which is really interesting because now you're going to have 4 astronauts, so teams of 2. So potentially they could actually split off. You could have 2 astronauts that are staying in a habitat while 2 go off in a lunar rover. You may have all 4 together. It'll just depend on the mission. You're going to have multiple vehicles you're accounting for, like a habitat. And so this question becomes, how many spacewalks can you do in the 30 days, right? How do you break this number down? And one of the things is this full versus half duration discussion. So very similar to doing a dive. You get ready to go out to go do the dive. Even if you're only using half the consumables, say in the oxygen tank, it still takes all that time to get ready. It still takes all that time to go outside. You have those single use items. And then, part of it is that worth it? Well, it might be worth it if, say, you're on a lunar rover, a pressurized lunar rover, and you decide, okay, I'm going to go to this site and I'm only going to do certain things. So I only need to go out the door for 2 hours or 4 hours, and then I can keep going. And then, you're doing it for science or exploration. So you're trying to hit a lot of different sites very quickly in a short amount of days. The other part about it could be, well, no, actually, I want to get a lot of work done. So I'm working outside, say, the habitat, and I'm setting up a grid system for power or solar, communication. And so then you really do need those longer spacewalks that might be a part of a kind of a different mindset. And these are very different conversations than we've had for ISS. A lot of times for Shuttle and ISS, kind of exactly what you're doing, and it's how many spacewalks will it take. And so being flexible for these longer duration missions, really acknowledging that the astronauts are going to have a pretty big call on how they feel. What is their fatigue level that day? What do they think they can do? Did they get to the site that they needed to get to? Do they want to stay longer because they're seeing something we're not, from a science or collection database aspect? So just, how much control do we give over to them, and the mission, and what does this mean? It's just kind of all these really big conversations. And of course, we still come back to always being safe. So the crew members really do need to tell us how they feel, how they're doing, and making sure we're their safety just really above all. So just hopefully I'm giving you a little glimpse on some of these very exciting conversations we're having right now, how they do align to maybe something you've experienced in your everyday life, and how they're becoming very real. And that's really exciting. Another thing that I kind of mentioned is, we can do all this planning, and you really need to do the planning. But there's a really complicated group of team members, from doctors, previous operators, engineers, scientists, we have computer programmers. We're really trying to use human-machine teaming on some of their interfaces for things like navigation, geology identification, data. I already mentioned potentially sharing their other buddy or partner systems, consumable data, and not trying to overload them, but trying to really understand kind of what is this best combination for everything that we're going to be asking them to look at, especially when they're at Mars and we have this delayed communication. So reaching out to that next level and really trying to say, okay, if I design now for Mars, how much is that going to give me for the moon? And what can I do as maybe a software upgrade over time, but really try to account for thinking about Mars now with some of that concept of operations. But I feel a little bit with my science background like it could almost all go out the door once we get real data. So I try to remind the kids I talk to, yeah, the moon seems so close, but I still don't have real data on this spacesuit, right? I have some very limited data from Apollo, but I don't have the data yet. So it may sound like it's going to be over, but it's not, until we get actual data back on the moon. There's just so many open questions we're going to have. And so it's just really the tip of the iceberg and in this exploration, this next phase. And I think there's going to be so much we're going to be able to learn moving forward. I promised a couple pictures of the pool. So this is, if you haven't seen it, it's amazing. This is the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory and NASA Johnson Space Flight Center. It's 40 feet deep, so 20 feet were dug into the ground and 20 feet are above ground. It's about 100 feet wide and 200 feet long. I have not written down, but I used to have it memorized, the amount of gallons of just water processing in a 24-hour period. And the water is, it's clear, it's not blue, but it's blue because it is so deep and large. So just like the ocean, you get this perspective of blue, but it's of course clear when you're diving in it. There's no dye in the water or anything like that. And the full space station fits in the pool for all the mock-ups, livable mock-ups fit in the pool. So you have the ability to, when you're moving or translating along, your distance for your gloved hands walking through is the exact distance that they would be doing on orbit. So, and we do have amazing safety divers. You can see the gear on the side of the pool here. They dive, 2-tank dive with a special mixed nitrox level. We do have pressurization chambers there in case there's any kind of medical issues. They can pull a diver or an astronaut in the suit out and repress them immediately if there's any kinds of issues. But yeah, it's amazing. I feel very lucky to have been a diver. We're hoping to go back to the NBL soon with our program. One of the objectives is we will have to dive in the pool, not dive in the pool, sorry, put our suit in the pool for the next level of NASA training that's going to occur for our suit. And so it's exciting to go back to the pool again and realize I'll be able to work there after being away for a while. So you can see all the flags on the wall of all the different international partners we have, which of course it takes a big effort to do something like this. I mentioned a little bit of the physicalness. So going to the moon is close. Going to Mars is going to be another challenge. If you guys were following Dr. Joe Dituri and his 100-day mission down at Jules. He was replicating some of the exercises they're looking at for the astronauts for Mars, specialty things that wouldn't require some of the larger exercise machines that they have right now on the International Space Station. So it'll be exciting to see what data he gets back there himself. And also, we have skeletal challenges. For me, one of the things I really love talking a little bit about is the neurological challenges, because we now have more insight with some of the MRIs that we've been collecting from the astronauts. And one thing we do know from these studies is that when the astronauts are on orbit, their brains are responding in a way while they're adjusting to microgravity as if they are learning a new skill set. So moving around microgravity, maybe just all the different inputs that they're getting, their brain is actually growing and learning as if you were learning a new skill set. And so we need to acknowledge that, because if any of you have learned a new language or a musical instrument, or really just anything that takes that kind of time and expertise level, you get tired, especially if you're learning a language. A lot of times you get tired. I remember I was doing some immersion training, and my language instructor basically said, it's okay if you need to go home and take a nap. Your brain is growing and learning and making new connections, go ahead and let it rest. You don't just have to stop, but if you have to sleep for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, that's fine, that's normal. So acknowledging that these astronauts, who are very smart, highly capable, really are going through a lot, and we need to make sure that we account for that. So they're learning this new skill set. We anticipate there's going to be a similar thing that's going to happen for the lunar surface and for Mars, and being able to work in 1/6 and 1/3 G. And so, you're learning all this, you're putting that demand on your brain, and you're trying to complete your mission objectives, and you're trying to be safe and be out and do spacewalks. So it's a lot we're asking of them, but I do think they're up for the challenge. And if you haven't seen it, here's some of the gear that the exercise equipment that they do use on the space station. And now they're growing a lot more of their own food, which will be helpful as well for the moon and especially Mars to keep their nutrition levels up. So all of this comes together to allow us to do spacewalks. So I was just going to end to mention kind of three books that have come out recently. When I was a girl, we had a lot of Apollo biographies, which are amazing. But if you haven't been following the last year or two, we've had 3 books come out by female astronauts, which give you a little bit of a different perspective. Kathy Sullivan published Handprints on Hubble, which is really great, and you might be familiar with her. She talks a lot about innovation and design, and she worked with the design engineers for a lot of the specialty tools that were designed to repair and fix Hubble. And she talks about kind of those personalities and what it was like to do those challenges and figure out how to build those tools for the first time. So it's a great book in that, and also hearing about her life story. Colonel Eileen Collins went ahead and published her book, Through the Glass Ceiling to the Stars. It's about leadership and kind of getting beyond your comfort zone. She tells some really amazing stories about how she learned how to become a leader, leaders that she had observed, and then also when she was scared, or when she had some learning stories, and kind of, I think, sharing that nobody's perfect, and you can make mistakes or get frustrated or try to figure things out through your life. And I think it's really great how vulnerable she was, and to share some of those stories. And then Nicole Stott has a great book. She's conservation and she's an artist, and so she brings kind of this love of the planet, and how she tried to inspire people and continues to inspire people through her artwork and her travels. So, and of course, also, flying in space. So kind of 3 great stories. If you're not familiar with them, I would encourage you to check them out. They're really awesome. So I think that's everything I had. I welcome questions, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. So.
That was amazing. I know that Julia's getting some answers that were in or questions, I should say. We need the answers from you that
Do
were
you
in
want
the
to play
chat.
the video?
The Collins Aerospace-led industry team has made a giant leap, and that small step just got easier. The next generation spacesuit, ready today so NASA can put boots back on the moon and beyond. From Apollo and the Space Shuttle to the International Space Station and Artemis. For over 40 years, this industry team has led the way, solving NASA's toughest space challenges. And now an advanced suit with a portable life support system that is fully functional, designed by astronauts for astronauts.
Our portable life support system is lightweight and modular. It's based on years of experience and research and development, and that it's functioning today.
I want to see NASA be successful, getting back to the moon and doing it as soon as possible, safely and successfully. We are committed to delivering the best product.
Designed for work and interacting with tools in a way that has never been seen before. More comfort, more mobility, more range of motion. Our next generation spacesuit accomplishes more. It also works with existing International Space Station structures, especially when operating critical extravehicular activities to sustain it.
I'm excited because we've designed a suit that will accommodate the shapes and sizes of all of our crew members.
From rear entry to waist entry, options to accommodate any mission. Interchangeable with existing suits for lower inventory and a smooth transition for the crew. A faster and less expensive evolution to propel NASA's future mission goals.
So all the components that are in that suit right now are designed purposefully to be able to be upgraded. I have been in spacesuits, in space. It's time for a new spacesuit.
Proven and purposeful, flexible and comfortable. Low risk, trusted technology. Our next generation spacesuit is ready today. Together, let's take that next step and put boots back on the moon and beyond.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start asking questions from the chat, if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so this first one is from James. He asks, how does space travel affect your hearing and audio abilities? It's different to scuba diving, I'm sure, but how?
So I'm not familiar of a lot of challenges for your hearing. You know, sometimes they do get kind of an upper respiratory type kind of, it's not an infection, but it's similar because all the fluid shifts and they have a lot of fluid that goes up to their head, and that can cause kind of some similar issues. But in general, what actually happens when they go down in pressure is their vocal cords change. So it's always interesting to hear an astronaut for the first time get in a spacesuit, and some people's voices don't change that much, and some people's voices change a lot, which is really interesting.
There is another question from Dean. He asks, are there any concrete solutions for space-induced osteoporosis? It seems like a non-starter if it cannot be resolved.
Yeah, so they did do a lot of early medicine that they were actually testing in parallel with kind of menopausal women and stuff to try to look at osteoporosis kind of pharmaceutical solutions. Now what they do is the machine that you saw, the ARAD, which allows them to actually do those squats. That helps quite a bit because it not only helps them with different muscle subsystems instead of just doing cardio, but it actually creates that pressure, that force from their shoulders and their spinal cord all the way down into through their legs. And that has been a big key piece, my understanding, I'm not a flight surgeon, but in helping with some of those effects.
Okay, this one's from Umberto. He asks, does the color of the spacesuit affect it in any way? Is white for heat purposes?
White is for heat purposes. Yes, very good. So you're right on there. Yeah, we do get questions about, could we make a, a pink or blue or, black spacesuit? And it seems tempting to make a black one, especially for the regolith and it getting dirty, but white is actually still the best color for the spacesuit. Yeah, without worries.
Hamas asks, is the spacesuit system based on CCR? And he didn't elaborate what that stood for.
Yeah, he's gonna have to, just so I don't see.
Okay. There's another one from David. He asked, is there a dive destination that reminds you most of being out in space?
Well, I haven't been to space. But I'm trying to think of just kind of the EVAs that I've supported. Definitely very clear water. When I go and I talk to, other people, one of my running jokes is that it's a good visibility day, but every day is a good visibility day in space. But yeah, I think, part of it is just really how far they can see is pretty amazing. So if you go down under the water and you ended up having a dive that was just amazing visibility, but you're still in your head thinking, yeah, I'm under the water, that's kind of similar to what we've heard from some of the astronauts, is it just feels very magical and a really different environment. But it's still very deadly.
Thomas has clarified that CCR stands for closed circuit rebreather. So like what we would use in scuba diving.
Yeah. So I don't dive rebreathers, so I'm not quite as familiar. I'm just kind of familiar in theory, but yes, we do keep it as much as a closed system. So we scrub. So certain suits use. So I can talk about the legacy suit. I won't talk too much about what the new technology we're going to use on the current new suits, but suits today, the legacy suits, they use a chemical reaction. So they use metal oxide to actually scrub the CO2 out. And once that cartridge is full, can't be used. They can regenerate it on orbit using heat. But yeah, we do try to keep as much of the oxygen as possible and just scrub out the C2 or the contaminants. We have a charcoal bed that scrubs out the contaminants in the airflow. And then we have a cooling process that allows any of the humidity coming off, your breath or your sweat. We try to pull that water out of the air as well. So when we circulate the O2 back, it is as pure of an O2 and cools down air back through their vent and over their face.
So in addition to Zoom, we also have some people watching here at the museum from the library, and we have young Sarah here, and she has a question for you. So I'm going to let her go ahead and ask her question.
Thank you. Hello, Adele.
Hi.
I'd like to ask you, how will radiation and the Van Allen belts affect astronauts on Mars' surface as compared to underground? What do you think?
Yeah. So it's a great question, because I think that is going to be one of the biggest differences that they're telling us we're going to see. Some of the flight surgeons and the radiation engineers we're seeing from the moon to Mars. So on the moon, they think there's a chance we can live on the surface in short periods of time. But for Mars, it sounds like it's definitely going to be underground. Which means that you really are coming up to the surface to do a spacewalk, which again gets into that climbing gear. And it kind of changes to your whole perspective on, like you said, the protection of the radiation and really taking it very seriously. Right now, we have notifications. So if there's a solar storm that's happening during a spacewalk, we try not to, if we know it's coming, because it takes a couple of days from the time that it happens, the coronal mass ejections happen on the sun. So if we know, we'll deconflict a spacewalk. If we have an issue where it happens quickly, or for some reason there's something unexpected, we have different protocols in place to kind of protect the astronauts. But you're correct that just living and sleeping on the surface of Mars is probably not the way it's going to go.
Okay, I'm going to pass my computer to Bradley now. He's another person here at the library who also has a question.
Hello, Adele. I'm looking to see whether or not you have an understanding on how long it's going to take to get to Mars to begin with.
Well, that depends on how you get there, right? So optimally, if you're trying to use kind of current day technology, we're talking about 6 months if the planets are aligned. There is discussion with NASA, and they've just announced they've started to collaborate with a DARPA program that's looking at a couple of different types of engines that would potentially allow them to get there faster. So we're always looking for new technologies, but I think in general, it's not bad to plan 6 months. Now, once you're there, and this is out there, you could definitely Google this information. So I'm going to limit how much I talk about it. But you know, you're talking about 18 months approximately to stay on the planet to again optimize that 6 months back. So the ability to abort and return is not the same as it is for the moon. And so you really do have to think about safety contingencies, redundancies, you know, a lot of what you guys saw in Artemis, in the Martian, where they're sending things ahead of time. I think that is very realistic. I think we will send ORU things. We'll think about what we can 3D print if something fails. Just making things very modular. That is something that's a different mindset now, so that you do have the ability to change things out. And it is because of that time duration.
Okay, this next one's from Susie. She asks, what time frame are we looking at for new moon landings and going to Mars, as far as how far in the future they are going to be?
That's a question for SpaceX. So SpaceX got awarded the Artemis 3 mission. So NASA's planning to use their rocket, their lander, to go to the surface of the moon. So right now they're saying 2026. And that is the timeline that we're looking at post in that future to have a lunar suit ready. So the Artemis 3 suit right now has been funded to Axiom. That is both for the ISS and Artemis. It is for us to hit our milestones. So both companies have to continue their development on time and hit their milestones. And if that's the case, then we will get to keep the contract for the first ISS suit. And they will keep the contract for Artemis 3. But for future suits, so past 2026, where it's kind of open. So we'll see. So I'm hoping to see our suit both on the space station and on the lunar surface, but it will be, you know, before 2030 is the plan for sure for the moon. So.
Okay, this next one is from Umberto again. He asks, are the moon and Mars suits going to be very different or very similar?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's two pieces to that. So the white part, the part you see that the crew member wears, called the pressure garment like system subsystem, is very similar between ISS to what it is today. So we're making some improvements, but those restrictions to staying in microgravity are similar. The plisses will have, the backpack life support system will have several upgrades from the suit we have today. That pliss, though, that life support system will work on the moon. So what will change from on orbit to being on the surface is actually that PGS system. We're going to have to upgrade the boots, the gloves, some of the TMG aspects, but the life support will stay the same. And the reason is because you're at a vacuum environment for both cases. But if you study Mars, you know that there is a slight atmosphere on Mars. And so some of the technology in the life support system will not be as compatible. And that's true of a lot of different designs of the spacesuits. So the change that we think for the moon to Mars will be probably a somewhat similar thermal for the PGS, but now you're going back to making upgrades on the life support system. So it really just depends on the interaction with the environment. So what is the ground, the soil equivalent, but then also do you have an atmosphere? What are the temperature conditions?
Okay, I believe Sarah has another question for you, so I'm going to pass the microphone to her.
Hi, Adele.
Hi.
Is one of the engines planned for use going to be the Vasmir of Chang Diaz? Do you know who he is?
Yeah, I do, but I probably don't have enough background to respond to that question. So I'm
Okay.
I'm not a rocket scientist in that sense. So I'm gonna punt on that one. Maybe one more. I think we're at 8 o'clock.
Okay, that's perfect because I have one more question. This one's from Dean. He says, how are changes in vision compensated for in space?
Yeah, so their astronauts are experiencing some changes in vision. We are still trying to understand that. There's a couple of different theories on what's happening, and there's some papers that have been published. But the way we're compensating right now is we build glasses for them. So some astronauts fly and they have good vision, and then they get up there and they experience changes. And we have a kit where they can put different lenses in a frame and actually now wear glasses as needed. Nobody's been so severe that they've, gone blind or something extreme, but some of them do need glasses, and some of them come back to Earth and their vision gets better. Some of them don't recover in the same way, and they still need some sort of glasses. And so we are still working to understand that. But so far, we've been able to address it enough that nobody loses kind of productivity while they're on the space station.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Again, this is recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel. If you didn't get a chance to ask a question tonight, we do kind of monitor that channel, and then we'll email back and forth with Adele and try to answer any questions that come up later. But thank you very much. Adele and her husband are already members at the History of Diving Museum. So as a thank you, we're extending that for an extra 362 days because we are closed for 3. So thank you for your support. You've been a great History of Diving Museum ambassador. We always really appreciate everything that you do.
Not a penny, but
and
you were
coming
there.
down to visit. So
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next month for Immerse Yourself.